In Chapter 3, Part 2 of the notes, we will look at energy for life, how energy flows through an ecosystem. First, we need to start with our potential energy. We transfer it to chemical energy in two different processes. The first one is chemosynthesis. This is when inorganic chemicals are used to create energy. The second way is photosynthesis. Radiant energy, or light energy, is used to convert into chemical energy. These two are done by organisms that can go through these processes. Other organisms need to then consume those organisms to gain this chemical energy. They break down this chemical energy to then create energy to work through the process of cellular respiration. In an ecosystem, it's broken down into many layers. The most specific is a species. This is one type of organism that can generally breed with one another. When species are gathered together in the same location, this is considered a population. When populations of different types of species are gathered together, we call this a community, sometimes referred to as a biological community. The final step is when we look at a community and all of its physical environment, the abiotic factors or non-living factors. This is called an ecosystem. When we look at how energy passes through an ecosystem, we must start with the producer. The producer is the organism that uses photosynthesis, or sometimes chemosynthesis, to create chemical energy. The productivity of an ecosystem is the amount of biomass produced in a given area over a period of time. Biomass is the amount of biological material in that area. This means that primary productivity comes from our producers in our ecosystem. Energy then moves through the ecosystem through the different organisms that eat one another. This is called a food chain. It's a linked feeding series. You can see different food chains at the bottom below. Food chains are basic and contain trophic levels. That's the organism's feeding status. But food webs can be created by putting together multiple food chains. Remember that all energy initially comes from the sun or an inorganic chemical. There are levels within a food chain. After you reach the producer, you get to the consumers. These harness the chemical energy of producers. Consumers can be leveled as primary, secondary, tertiary, or higher depending on how long the food chain is. You can see several examples of food chains along with their primary, secondary, and so forth consumers and producers listed below. Consumers come in several different forms. Some of these are carnivores. These are animals that mainly eat meat. Other consumers are herbivores. These are animals that mainly eat plants. Omnivores will eat both plants and meat to gain their food. Decomposers are another type. These break down dead or dying material. Next on the list we have scavengers. These eat from dead carcasses, but are different than decomposers because they don't break down and recycle the organism. Detritivores are also consumers that pick up litter, debris, and dung. Again, different from decomposers because they're not breaking down and recycling the material that they're eating. When we look at our food chains, we can put them into what we call a biomass pyramid. This shows one step of the trophic level to the next and shows how much energy is actually passed on from one level to the next. Remember in the previous chapter that we said the second law of thermodynamics says that with each energy transfer, less is available to do work. This comes in handy when we look at our food chains. We know that we need more producers because only 10% of the energy made from that producer is actually passed on to that primary consumer. The 10% rule goes up each level of the food chain. This means that 90% of the energy from that organism is either used for their own energy to grow or is lost as heat. You can see the pyramids on the right that show that the top level consumers there are much less of in the population than there are of the bottom level producers. If we don't have a strong producer base, we won't be able to support the top level consumers in an ecosystem.